Thank you again. Good afternoon. Y'all can say it with more feeling than that. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I just want to say just a few things very briefly. Frankly, I think about why we've been talking about evangelism and why it matters, and frankly, why I think it makes a difference, not just in individuals' lives, but frankly, in the life of the world. And it begins to some extent for those of us who are followers of Jesus with the words and call and the summons of Jesus. It's all over the Gospels. I mean, he says in Mark, go and proclaim the good news to the whole creation. That's big. At Matthew, at the end of Matthew's, go and make disciples of all nations, all nations, all sorts and conditions, all stripes and types of God's children. And in the Acts of the Apostles part of Luke, Luke's part one, the Gospel is part one, and the Acts of the Apostles is part two of Luke's great work. In the first chapter of Acts, Jesus says, go, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and unto the uttermost parts of the earth. There is this call, this summons, this imperative to go and tell somebody, show somebody something about this Jesus of Nazareth. The way he lived, the life he calls us into, the way he loves, the way he does justice, that there's something compelling about that, about sharing that life of Jesus that matters to individuals and matters to the life of the world. Now let me just tell you a quick story, and then I'm going to sit down. For 12 years before I was elected bishop, I was privileged to serve as rector of an inner city parish in the city of Baltimore, Maryland, large urban metropolis, in a congregation in the center city, in the inner city of that church. And I served there from 88 until the year 2000 when I was elected bishop. And about in the late 80s, after some of you may remember when crack cocaine hit the streets of many of our urban centers in the early 80s, by the late 80s, the impact of that, the social impact, not only on individual life, but on the life of communities was really taking root. And we were living with, in Baltimore at that time, the proliferation of drive-by shootings that were related to territorial wars and on and on and on. I found myself as the rector of an inner city priest, not only doing funerals for people who had lived there 70 years and 10, but doing funerals for 19-year-old young men. And in one of these particular funerals, a young man who had been gunned down by a drive-by shooting that was an assassination, after I'd spent time with his mama in her kitchen weeping like Mary at the cross, weeping. We had the funeral. St. James Church was filled with 700 or 800 young people. And I realized that day, this is about 1989 or 1990, I looked out on that congregation and realized that I had never seen most of them before. I hadn't seen them in church school. I hadn't seen them in vacation Bible school. I hadn't seen them in youth group. And the more I talked and paid attention, I realized that I was standing before a community of our youth who were unfamiliar, much less with church, but unfamiliar with who this Jesus is that we often talk about in the church. Well, after the service, we went to the graveyard, to the cemetery, and some of the pallbearers were some of this young man's friends. And when we had finished the service at the graveside, we stepped aside and were getting ready to leave. And they walked up to the coffin. I mean, several of them, about 7 or 8 of them, walked up to the coffin. And one of them put his hand on the coffin and said, "We'll see you real soon." Now, my friends, in that moment, I realized that a 19-year-old life that has no vision greater than this life, no meaning greater than what is just given by the world, is a life that is doomed to end up shot up and dead in the grave. Like the Old Testament says, without a vision, the people perish. When I talk about evangelism, I'm talking about sharing a vision of life that can transform life. Talking about a way of life that can give life, a way of life that can ennoble the best that is in us, that can show us how to love, how to care, how to be compassionate, how to save this world so that we stop living the nightmare we often live and live what Desmond Tutu so rightly calls God's dream for us all. And so the bishops of the Anglican Communion have spent today and last evening talking about that, about the Jesus who said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty all those who are oppressed, and to proclaim, as my great-grandma used to say in the South of America, that great getting up morning of the Lord." And that's what evangelism is about. And my friends, for some in this world, that is life and death. God bless you.